I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Have you ever had trouble understanding your doctor? Communication is critical to the doctor-patient relationship. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Some people say they've been fired by their doctors if they questioned a prescribed treatment. Dr. David Myers is the Chief Medical Officer of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality.
Patients have the right to say, this isn't working for me, and find another doctor whenever they want, whenever they need to. Doctors should not have that same luxury.
There was a time when doctors' decisions were always final. Now, patients have a responsibility to participate in their own care.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, when should you fire your doctor?
First, the news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, aspirin is a very old drug, but scientists are still trying to figure out if it should be used to prevent heart attacks and strokes. A meta-analysis published in JAMA reviewed the results of 13 placebo-controlled trials with a total of more than 160,000 participants and more than 1 million participant years. The authors found that people taking aspirin were significantly less likely to suffer heart attacks, strokes, or death from cardiovascular causes. The difference was small, though, with an absolute risk reduction of just 0.4%. The analysis also considered whether people taking aspirin were more likely to experience major bleeding. They were, although here too the difference was small, about 0.5%. The risk and the benefit are almost evenly matched. Of course, this makes a decision to use aspirin more complicated, especially for people without heart disease. The authors note, consequently, the decision to use aspirin for primary prevention may need to be made on an individual basis, accounting for the patient's risk of bleeding and their views on the balance of risk versus benefit. An editorial in the same issue notes that because weighing the risks and benefits of aspirin in primary prevention is complicated, it should involve a shared decision-making discussion between the patient and the clinician.
Detecting Alzheimer's disease is complicated. There are no simple tests. Doctors can perform cognitive function evaluations and order brain imaging, but to date, definitive diagnosis relies on autopsy examination. Now, researchers report that a blood test may be able to detect signs of neuron degeneration many years before symptoms appear. The investigators published their findings in Nature Medicine. They looked for a structural protein in blood that indicates neuronal destruction. 247 volunteers who had a genetic risk for early-onset Alzheimer's disease were matched with family members without the genetic marker. All subjects gave blood, performed cognitive tests, and underwent imaging scans. The researchers analyzed blood for a protein called neurofilament light chain that is released when brain cells disintegrate. The people with a gene for early Alzheimer's disease had higher protein levels when first tested. Their levels of neurofilament rose steadily with time. The other participants had steady, low levels of the protein. Differences in the protein were detectable 16 years before the expected onset of symptoms. Rapid increases in neurofilament light chain levels were linked to brain shrinkage visible on scans. This preliminary test is not yet ready for clinical use, but the authors hope it will someday allow doctors to diagnose Alzheimer's disease when intervention still might make a difference.
Insulin was first used to treat type 1 diabetes on January 11, 1922. It was a major medical breakthrough. The patent on insulin expired many decades ago. For years, the price of this crucial medicine was affordable. More recently, though, drug companies have modified insulin through genetic engineering. New insulins led to new patents and higher prices. The nonprofit Healthcare Cost Institute estimates that the yearly insulin cost for people with type 1 diabetes in 2012 was around $2,800 a patient. By 2016, that number had almost doubled to roughly $5,700 annually. Many people have difficulty paying for their insulin. In recent months, there have been deaths attributed to people trying to ration their insulin supplies. An NBC News report followed Americans buying insulin in Mexico. They spent about $900 for medicine that would have cost $8,500 at home.
A collaboration between American and Chinese scientists has found evidence that oolong tea may help prevent breast cancer. About 2% of the tea consumed in the world is oolong tea, and most of it's grown in Fujian province in China. Epidemiological data show that breast cancer is far less common in Fujian province than elsewhere in the country. Extracts of oolong tea inhibited the growth of 6 different breast cancer cell lines with distinctive characteristics. Breast cancer cells treated with oolong had DNA damage, although the tea is not known to damage DNA in normal cells. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Our topic today is the changing relationship between doctors and patients. Decades ago, doctors' orders were accepted without question. Patients were just expected to comply. But over the last several decades, this relationship has changed. People have more access to much more health information. Medical students are taught that shared decision-making is the best approach. How can patients take more responsibility for their health? In the second part of the show, we'll talk with Dr. David Myers, Chief Medical Officer of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality.
Our first guest is Tricia Torrey, founder of Every Patient's Advocate. After an experience with a serious misdiagnosis in 2004, she set out to help others become smart patients. Tricia has written 6 books, including the 10 Mistakes Every Patient Makes and the top 10 reasons you need a professional patient advocate by your side.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Tricia Torrey.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Tricia, I wonder if you could share with our listeners your story. How did you get involved in patient advocacy?
Well, Joe, it's a story that I have told and retold, and but the basics remain the same, obviously. In 2004, I was a marketing consultant. I didn't know anything at all about the healthcare system. And along about June, I found this lump on my torso. It was about the size of a golf ball. Very odd. Went to my primary care doctor, went to my surgeon. They removed it. And 2 weeks later, they called me to tell me that I had a very rare lymphoma and that they'd never seen it before. It was that rare. And that they were going to make an appointment for me with an oncologist, which, because I didn't know anybody in the healthcare system, then took 3 weeks. Well, you can imagine it was so upsetting. I mean, just totally threw me off my game. I spent all kinds of time with Dr. Google trying to figure out what this strange lymphoma was. And what I read, sadly enough, said, in every case, said that I only had a few months to live. And when I finally got to see the oncologist, they ran tests, CAT scans, blood work, the whole thing. And those tests came back clear. They couldn't find any other evidence of lymphoma, so that seemed very odd. But when I asked the oncologist what my prognosis was, his reply to me was, well, I wouldn't bother doing my Christmas shopping. And that was in August.
Whoa.
So, yeah. So now, not only was I upset because I believed that I was going to be dead within a few months, but now I was ticked off that anybody would talk to me in that tone of voice. So I decided I needed to get a second opinion. In 2004, we really didn't talk too much about getting second opinions. And it really took me quite a bit of time. It took me several weeks to actually find a doctor who could give me that second opinion. And in order to do that, I got a hold of my medical records, which people also didn't do very much in 2004. And honestly, to this day, I don't know what compelled me to even ask for them. But when I looked at the lab results and and Googled the living daylights out of them, including, did you know that you can Google Greek symbols?
I had no idea.
You can. You just use the little character map on your computer, and you can Google those Greek symbols, because there were deltas and there were gammas and there were all these things that I didn't recognize except kind of from biology and chemistry class in high school. In any case, eventually I came to the conclusion I had no lymphoma. And when I got to the second opinion doctor, told him what I had seen, he sort of chuckled, but he said, in fact, these reports do say you have this strange lymphoma, but I see why you think you don't. And I know there's a hematopathologist, which was a whole new word to me. I had never heard that word, at the National Institutes of Health. And she can look at these, your tumor, your lump, and tell us what she sees. Well, now making a very long story just a little bit longer, finally they came back at the end of September. So I went from June to the end of September thinking I was going to die by Christmas. And at the end of September, I was told that there was no malignancy and that, in fact, I did not have lymphoma. And to this day, I do not have an alternate diagnosis. Nobody's ever been able to figure out what that was. I've had a few lumps since then. Now I just ignore them and they go away. I know they weren't lymphoma and they just disappear. But it was horribly, horribly stressful. And not only was any trust I had in the healthcare system just totally gone out the window, but it also cost me every penny of my savings for them to be wrong. And I had health insurance. I had high deductible health insurance. And so at the end of it, I was just so angry. And as my own catharsis, I started reading everything I could about misdiagnosis, which then led me to the reading about medical errors. And the Institute of Medicine's report in 1999 that between 44 and 98,000 Americans die every year from medical errors. And one thing led to another, and I started writing articles to help patients become smarter about their health care, to help them take responsibility for making some of their own decisions and asking their doctor questions and looking for really good, solid information on the internet and not just the stuff that pharmaceutical companies put out, for instance. And eventually, I ended up with a radio show and I ended up speaking all over the country and I wrote a couple of books and kind of the rest of it's all out there on the internet and easy to find. But that's what got me started, having no background in healthcare whatsoever. So I actually approach things from a little bit of a different point of view of most of the folks that I work with.
Well, I can really see how that would have set you up on a path to becoming a patient advocate. But I think a lot of us haven't met a patient advocate before and may not have much of an idea about what a patient advocate could do for you and how you would find one if you found yourself in one of those terrible situations like you did in 2004.
Well, it's a great question, and I thank you for asking it, Terry. My work has all evolved to working with professional, independent patient advocates. And these are folks that you can hire, just like you would hire a lawyer to help you with the legal system or any kinds of legal contracts you might need, or certainly lawsuits or that kind of a thing. But we have patient advocates, hundreds of them all over the country, who can be hired to help you with everything from talking to your doctor, to doing research online, to looking at alternative diagnoses, to assessing your treatment options and helping you make decisions, to accompanying you to the emergency room, all the way through to reviewing your medical bills at the end. And then even if somehow they are way too high, either fairly or unfairly, to help you negotiate those bills. They can help you choose the right health insurance for you. They can help you if you are the adult child of elderly parents who live elsewhere and you can't be there to see them and help them all the time. They can step in for your elderly parent. Anything, but they're independent. You hire them. When we say independent, we mean your insurance doesn't cover them. The only way they get paid is out of your own pocket. But just like you would hire a lawyer and it's worth every penny, even though it might be a little expensive, that's exactly what independent patient advocates do as well.
I am wondering now how a patient should go about choosing a doctor. This is an important relationship. What can you advise us?
Absolutely, it's an important relationship, and I'm not sure that people give it the consideration that they should be giving it. So, for instance, so many of us we might look up in our health insurance and see which doctors are covered by our insurance, and that is a good start. Definitely, it's a good start. But then we go picking doctors based on what we hear from other people. And sometimes that's not the best input we can get. So we might go online and look at one of the doctor review sites, but look at the questions that are being asked. So if what you want to do is choose a doctor because you've heard that that doctor is nice or has good bedside manner or something along that line, that's a start. But we need to remember that nice doesn't necessarily equal competent. So as we're looking for doctors, we need to, number one, yes, look and see, make sure that our health insurance covers the doctor we want to see. Or vice versa, if you are during the time of year where you have open enrollment and you can choose new health insurance, you might want to look and see if the doctors you wish you could see will be covered by an insurance policy. You can do it in either direction. You also want to make sure a doctor is covered or has privileges to work in your hospital of choice, and sometimes it takes a little uncovering to figure out the right hospitals. There are databases, they're put out by a number of different organizations that can give you hospital ratings based on things like infections and medical errors. So you might want to choose the right hospital alongside the right doctor, even if it's primary care. And then you want to look at things like if you need a surgeon, for instance, you want to look at a surgeon not just who's very good and well known, but is very good and well known with the kind of surgery you need. So some surgeons, you might find the best heart surgeon in the world, but if that heart surgeon only does bypass and what you need is something different, then that might not be the right surgeon for you.
Tricia, go ahead.
I was going to say you also want to look at a doctor who communicates well. And so lots of good doctors are out there, but if they're not good communicators, you won't get the information you need. And that's an assessment you might need to actually visit with that doctor to make. And while you're there, you can also look at that doctor and think, can I understand what that doctor has to say? Is it logical what that doctor is saying? Do I agree with what the doctor is telling me? And if I don't, am I comfortable asking questions of that doctor to go forward with that relationship? Some doctors you're going to have a relationship with maybe forever, for the rest of your life, maybe like a primary care doctor. And other doctors you're only going to have a short-term relationship with, like a surgeon who might do your surgery.
You're listening to Tricia Torrey, founder of Every Patient's Advocate. After her own misdiagnosis, she decided that we all need to learn to be smart patients and take more responsibility for our own medical care. Since no one ever teaches us to do that, she started to learn how we can and to teach others. Tricia has written the You Bet Your Life book series to help patients get the most from the healthcare system. They include the 10 mistakes every patient makes, how to fix them to get the health care you deserve. Also, the top 10 reasons you need a professional patient advocate by your side. Tricia's efforts have encouraged the development of independent professional healthcare advocates.
After the break, find out more about a modern relationship with your doctor, in contrast to the old doctor knows best style.
How do you determine if a doctor is right for you?
We'll also find out how to move on from your doctor if and when that time comes.
How can you repair a damaged relationship with your healthcare provider?
And what's the best way to deal with a disagreement with your doctor?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. Kaya Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's Kaya Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. If you would like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1150. That number again, 800-732-2334, or visit the website peoplespharmacy.com. You can also download the free podcast from iTunes.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KayaBiotics.com.
We're talking about how the doctor-patient relationship has changed. How can patients participate more fully in decisions about their own health care?
We're talking with Tricia Torrey, founder of Every Patient's Advocate. After her own misdiagnosis, she decided that we all need to learn to be smart patients and take more responsibility for our own medical care. Since no one ever teaches us how to do that, she's written books to explain it. They include the You Bet Your Life book series to help patients get the most from the healthcare system. Tricia's efforts have encouraged the development of independent healthcare advocates as a profession.
Tricia, in the old days, it used to be so easy because doctor knew best. And you would go to a doctor, you would probably stay with that doctor for much, if not most of your life. And whatever the doctor said, that's what you did. There were no questions, there was no internet, there were no second guesses. And I think it was probably very comfortable both for the patient as well as for the physician. That whole relationship has changed dramatically. What are the consequences?
That relationship has changed dramatically. You're absolutely right, Joe. And the consequences are, I think the biggest consequence is that that whole sense of trust has just disappeared. It has just totally disappeared. And one of the reasons for that is because for the first time, patients have begun to understand the relationship between the care they seek, the care they need, and the payment system, which we didn't understand for the longest time. So many of us worked for an employer who provided the health insurance we needed or provided payment for our medical care. So we went off to the doctor prescribed something, we filled the prescription, we took the prescription, and we all moved on. But over time, what has happened was we've understood better and better how the payment system works. We've also understood, I think from media, that system isn't always in our best interests. That sometimes what we're being prescribed has more to do with how much money a hospital can make or a specific doctor can make or how much money is flying under the table, whatever those kinds of things. And even if the doctors we work with would never consider doing any of those things or being involved in any of that, we don't know. And it's not even a question we can ask. And so now all of a sudden, for the first time, those of us who've never been smart patients, we never needed to be smart, we never needed to start asking questions, we feel in our gut, I'll go back to our gut, we feel in our gut that we need to start sticking up for ourselves in ways we never did before. And it's a shame. And it's all because trust has been eroded by the money system that we've all become aware of.
Tricia, I have a question about communication style because I think an awful lot of people base their relationship with their doctor on how well he or she communicates. How good is the bedside manner? And one of the problems with that is it may not reveal competence. We have a dear friend who told us about a story. She was looking for an OBGYN, and she asked all her friends, and they all said, "Oh, Dr. X, he's so wonderful. We love him. He's great." And then she asked a couple of nurses about that doctor, and they all said, "Don't go to him. He's not really very competent," even though everybody thought he had a great communication ability.
You know, Joe, that is Such a great point. And yes, it's absolutely so important. Just because a doctor is nice does not mean that that doctor is competent. And yes, communication is very, very important as long as it's the right communication. And so, for instance, doctors get into habits and patterns just like the rest of us do. And sometimes they look at people exactly the same way, even if those people don't have exactly the same situation. And so if a doctor gets into a pattern or a habit and doesn't have the ability to discern something different with what you're doing, that means that you're not really getting the care you need to get from the doctor, and you need to be asking more questions. So don't think that just because a doctor is nice means the doctor is a good doctor.
Tricia, we'd like to ask about when it might become time to move on. When you're interacting with the doctor and you realize that perhaps he's treating you as though you were somebody else, as you were just alluding to, not somebody with your specific either problems or values. How do you make that determination, and then how do you end the relationship gracefully?
You know, that's such a good question, Terry, because so many of us might see doctors and all we have is an uneasy feeling that something isn't quite right. It could be as simple as you were always able to go see that doctor and get as much time as you felt you needed, and now all of a sudden you're feeling rushed. Or it might be something else, like you go to your doctor with a set of symptoms and the doctor tells you that he or she thinks you have this or have that, and you go home and you get online and you find out that no, that's not really a good description of what you've got, and you're not sure that that's correct. And I would say to patients, and I do say to patients, don't feel as if you have to put your finger on the reason it's time to see another doctor. If all you have is a gut reaction that something isn't exactly right, that's the time to start looking. Now, that's not the time to call the doctor's office and say, you know what, I'm changing doctors. I can't see Dr. So-and-so anymore. I'm not getting what I need. What you really do need to do is find your next doctor before you leave the one before. For a number of reasons, not the least of which is you need to get a hold of your medical records, and you need to have them cooperative to get a hold of your medical records. And so if you're ready to move on to another doctor for whatever reason, and there are many reasons that might happen, make sure that you find the new doctor before you leave the old doctor, and then make sure, if you can, if you have the opportunity, that you let them know once that, let's call it a transaction, is taken care of. Your medical records have been shifted, the last of the billing has been taken care of. Provide some feedback. Say, you know what, I saw Dr. So-and-so for so many years, but I just felt as if something wasn't right anymore, and I would like Dr. So-and-so to take a look at how services are being delivered and whether or not there should be a shift there.
Tricia, if there's a time when a patient feels that the relationship with the healthcare provider has become frayed, are there good ways to repair it?
You know, you can attempt to repair it. If you feel like this is a doctor whose relationship you really do want to save, there are some things you can do. For instance, step back and figure out why that relationship isn't going well. Is it your own fault? For instance, do you owe the doctor money, or have you been too demanding? We find a lot of patients now who are getting very frustrated with their doctors who might have prescribed them, for example, pain medication. And now they won't prescribe that anymore. And you need to figure out why they won't prescribe it anymore. And I can tell you that in most cases, it's because the legal system will not allow them to prescribe it anymore. They're carrying databases that have that information. So if you can figure out why the relationship went south, and there's something that you can actually do to affect it, then I would say go ahead and approach the doctor. Maybe start with an apology. You know, I was too demanding, or I was asking you for things that I realize now you couldn't give to me, or I owed you money and now I've caught up on my balance, whatever those kinds of things would be. But if you assess the relationship and you find out that the doctor can no longer provide what you need, even though you really like that doctor, then don't try to fix it. You need to move on. And because of the way health insurance reimbursements work anymore, it probably isn't worth your efforts to try to repair that relationship.
You know, Tricia, one of the stories that we quite frequently hear from patients has to do with I don't even want to call it a disagreement, but a different value system or a different approach. For example, decades ago, we heard from a number of women who said, my doctor wants me on hormone replacement therapy, estrogen in particular. And what happened in those situations was the woman felt uncomfortable taking hormones. And the physician may have said, well, if you don't take HRT, if you don't take Premarin, for example, or Prempro, then I'm going to fire you. And the woman felt really uncomfortable about that because they really liked the doctor, but they didn't want to take the hormones. These days we hear from patients who say, I really don't want to take statins. They make my muscles hurt. They make me feel weak and just less capable. I don't exercise as much, but my doctor really, really wants me to take statins. And I don't know what to do about it because I really like the doctor. How do you deal with a situation where there's that kind of disagreement?
It's a good question, and there are actually a number of different answers, and not every answer will apply in every case. So I absolutely hear you on the HRT, and I absolutely hear you on the statins. Here's the thing. Doctors feel as if they have certain levels they have to achieve with their patients. And sometimes the short and easy answer is to prescribe something. And they also might look at a patient and say, this patient is or is not being, and the word they use is adherent. They used to say compliant. All of those indicate that I'm telling the patient what to do and he or she doesn't want to do it. And they might look at those as reasons to actually say to you, I might not be your best doctor anymore. And so what you have to decide is if communication has broken down, if the doctor says to you, I really want you to take statins, and you say to your doctor, I don't want to take statins, there must be an alternative. I've read so many bad things about statins, and I'm not indicating there are bad things, but if you feel like that's what you've read, then you need to have that conversation with your doctor. If your doctor won't have that conversation and won't discuss it with you so that you can be the person making that decision, then that is an indication that it's time to find another doctor, no matter how much you like that doctor. Because if you've reached a disagreement about something you're going to put into your body every day, that's a reason to go looking for someone else. Now, what you might want to do is get a second opinion. Rather than just saying, I'm leaving this doctor, you might want to get a second opinion about those statins. Or you might ask your doctor, give me some information I can read that's more positive than what I'm reading. Or see if you can, for lack of a better term, negotiate what that relationship is going to be. You don't just have to up and walk out. I don't mean that by any stretch. But I do mean that this is your body, and you're the person who has every right to make the decisions about it. And if you can't negotiate that with your doctor, then it's time to do something different until, again, your gut tells you you're now making the right decision.
Tricia Torrey, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you, Terry.
You've been listening to Tricia Torrey, founder of Every Patient's Advocate. Tricia is author of 6 books, including the You Bet Your Life book series to help patients get the most from the healthcare system. Her efforts have encouraged the development of independent professional healthcare advocates. You can find links to her work on our website.
To get a physician's perspective on the changing doctor-patient relationship, we turn now to Dr. David Myers. He's not just any doctor. He's the Chief Medical Officer at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, known as AHRQ, or ARC. Prior to his appointment as CMO, he directed ARC's Center for Evidence and Practice Improvement.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. David Myers.
So good to be here today with you all.
Dr. Myers, I wonder if you'll tell us a little bit about the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality.
Thanks so much, Terry. I love where I work. Our agency is one of the smallest parts of the Department of Health and Human Services, the federal agency that looks over American health and healthcare. And our job, we get to come in every day and think about how to help doctors and nurses and the systems they work in provide safer care, higher quality care, more valuable care, more patient-centered care, and more equitable care for all Americans.
That sounds very important. Dr. Myers, once upon a time, not even all that long ago, the doctor was the authority. He or she, often he, was the one who made the diagnosis, decided on the treatment, and, the doctor's word was what the patient was expected to follow. You followed doctor's orders.
It was the law, not literally, but figuratively when it came to your health.
Now, with the advent of the internet, patients are going online, they're entering their own symptoms, they're doing self-diagnoses, they're figuring out what treatments are available. They can't prescribe for themselves, but they're doing a lot of other things, and they come to their doctor with this sometimes sheaf of papers they have printed off the internet. And even if they don't have a literal sheaf of papers, they've got their ideas that they have gotten online. This leads to a lot of frustration. Doctors are frustrated. Patients are frustrated. And one or the other party may walk away from this interaction, this relationship, in a huff. Can you tell us how you see today's doctor-patient relationship?
Well, thanks, Terry. It's such a rich topic for us to be talking about. And I think about it that in the last 25 years, there's really been a powerful evolution in how we think about doctors and patients partnering with each other. And you're right, 25, 50 years ago, the doctor was a fix-it repair person, and you brought your body to the doctor, and the doctor checked it out and fixed it, and you were sort of a passive observer. At least that's how doctors thought about it. I actually believe if we went back and looked at it, a lot of us didn't listen to what the doctor said, but we just didn't say that to their face.
And even today, people might not tell their doctors
tell their doctor everything. So that part has continued. But what's changed, I think, is the whole system, both doctors and patients and healthcare systems, approach to how we do this. And I think it's very, very healthy. And you're right. I agree with you. Part of the reason for this change has been the democratization of knowledge. The internet makes so many more things available to so many of us. Although it's not all of us, and not all of us yet know how to use the internet to find good health information. But you described the situation of an empowered patient, somebody who's gone ahead and started to try to understand their own body and what the possible reasons for the things they're feeling are, and are interested in solving it. And they come to the doctor looking for a partnership. And I think most healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses and physician's assistants, pharmacists today welcome the chance to be partners, to be coaches, to be guides, recognizing that everything we do is for the patient to help the patient improve their health. And we don't have the right answer. We give guidance. We can talk about the pros and the cons of different options. We can help patients figure out what may be causing their symptoms. But it's coming up with a solution or a plan that works for the patient. And so this evolution, I think, is very, very healthy. But just like all change, change is hard, and it can lead to frustrations.
You're listening to Dr. David Myers. He's the Chief Medical Officer at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. He assists in strategic planning and leads AHRQ's response to the nation's opioid crisis.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll find out how to make sense of the avalanche of healthcare information that you might encounter.
Sometimes health problems can be solved by changing exercise or eating habits. How well do doctors communicate lifestyle treatment options? And how well do patients respond?
If doctors and patients are in a partnership, both partners are responsible for making the relationship work.
Doctors sometimes fire patients for not following through. When is that appropriate?
How can you fix an impaired relationship with your doctor?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. If you would like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1150. That number again, 800-732-2334, or you can purchase it online at peoplespharmacy.com. You can also download the free podcast from iTunes or from our web store. We invite you to consider writing a review.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from hypoallergenic organic ingredients. That's KAYA Biotics.com.
Have you ever been fired by your doctor? What was going on to precipitate such a breach? Have you ever considered firing your doctor?
The idea of shared decision-making is relatively new in medicine. There was a time when doctor knew best. Those days are over. Patients and health professionals now need to negotiate the new ways of determining the most appropriate treatment for a specific situation.
We're talking with Dr. David Myers. He's the Chief Medical Officer of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. He assists in strategic planning and leads AHRQ's response to the nation's opioid crisis. He also directs Evidence Now, AHRQ's $110 million initiative to help primary care practices improve the heart health of their patients through quality improvement support and the implementation of new evidence.
Dr. Myers, there is so much information out there. And it's not just, the evening news. It's not just the newspapers and magazines, but especially the Internet. It used to be that physicians had the responsibility of interpreting information and making it relevant for the patient. But now we all have access. I mean, I don't know what we would do if we didn't have access to the online medical libraries that are available to us. Because now we get not just the abstract from PubMed, we get full text at a moment's notice. It is such a luxury. And yet trying to make sense of that medical literature, trying to discern what's relevant, what's not, the difference between relative risk and absolute risk, it's hardly any surprising that patients are confused, but even health professionals sometimes get confused about discerning the difference between the guidelines and the latest research. So how can we make sense and collaborate as partners with this it's almost an avalanche of information?
Amazing question, Joe. I think I'd start by saying the first thing is that as patients, all of us are experts in our own body, in our own health, our own story. We know our symptoms, what we're feeling, more than anyone else. And we're the one who knows where we want to go on our health journey. And if we don't take ownership for that first in the relationship with our doctors and healthcare professionals, we are not going to make progress. You then brought up the idea, though, that sometimes people can become empowered to start finding the answers themselves by reading the medical literature. And I think that's a great thing. And any patient, any person who wants to do that, I encourage them to. But we all recognize that not everyone has the same set of skills. We didn't all go to the same schools or the same amount of schooling. And so there are roles for doctors in helping people with very low health literacy interpret the medical literature in a way that helps them make good decisions, but also when the PhD biochemist walks in, partnering with them to help them interpret the literature and go forward. And doctors ourselves need help sometimes. And that's why I think most medical professionals recognize they work in a team. They can't know it all. It's not just the medical information on the internet is available to all of us. The amount of information, the amount of research being published every year is going up. It is impossible for any one person to believe, well, actually some of them may believe, but it is actually impossible for them to know everything there is to know about medicine. So we all have to rely on each other.
Now, Dr. Myers, one of the areas that, is always fundamental to better health, they're lifestyle issues. I mean, we hear this from cardiologists all the time. Cardiologists who love statins, but they'll say, well, no, eating healthy food and exercising are the absolute foundations. We start there. We want people to lose weight if they're overweight. And yet that is very hard. If it were easy, we would have solved this obesity problem decades ago. But we know that when a doctor says to somebody, sort of wagging their finger, you need to eat less and exercise more, that doesn't do the trick. In fact, there was a study just recently in JAMA, I think it was, Terry.
JAMA Network Open.
Yeah, in which they said people lie to their doctors 60 to 80% of the time when it comes to things like
mostly exercise and diet.
And diet. So and this leads to frustration on the part of the patient who can't always lose the amount of weight and exercise as much as they would like, and the physician who is like hoping that you'll have a better quote unquote report card the next time you come into the office. So in some cases we've heard that physicians fire patients for not getting their act together, and sometimes patients leave doctors because they're embarrassed, they're frustrated, they're outraged. So how do we deal with this? Oh, just lose weight and exercise more. Oh, and by the way, stop smoking.
A whole bunch of great issues packed into that question. Let's start with, if it's okay, wanted to go back to that idea of how doctors sometimes make patients feel ashamed or not wanting to admit the truth. Because the therapeutic relationship between a healthcare provider and a patient is only as good as the truth that is being expressed. When patients feel the need to hide how they're feeling, what they want, what their health behaviors are, how they're improving their health, and how they may not be taking care of themselves, it makes it impossible to achieve the actual goal of getting information from the healthcare provider to help you make better decisions. Without the real information, the true information, you can't get there. And you pointed out that sometimes it is my profession, doctors, nurses, who make it hard for patients to tell the truth. So one of the great things that I've seen around the country, our health professional schools are teaching medical students and nursing students how to be better partners, better communicators, speaking in non-judgmental language, helping people understand that there is no wrong answer other than a lie. And so you don't, as a doctor, I don't ask the question, are you exercising 3 times a day like I told you to? I wouldn't have said that, but I would never ask the question that way. The question needs to be phrased in terms of lots of people have trouble meeting their exercise goals. How have you been doing? So where you destigmatize tough issues like drugs and sex and eating and exercise. When the health professionals become better communicators, patients get more health. And so clearly an important stop.
Dr. Myers, you've just described a beautiful way to reframe a potentially difficult question into one that is open-ended and non-judgmental. Are there other ways that a healthcare professional can help a patient?
So, Terry, it is such an important concept we're getting at right here about that this is a partnership between the doctor and the patient. And for patients to get the most out of it, they have to realize this isn't about getting fixed. This isn't, I think one of the places we sometimes run into problems in developing our relationships between doctors and patients is when patients think they can come in and say, I have a pain, fix it, make it go away, and believe the doctor will take care of all the rest. And so this shift in attitude that we're a team and that we both have to do work and that this isn't always going to be easy. I think that's one of the hardest things I found as a primary care doctor is helping people realize that there isn't always a simple, quick fix. And that for these hard things like behavior changes in how we eat or we sleep or the health of our personal relationships, that takes work and not a pill. And if you're willing to talk about it and come up with a plan and work on it over time, I think people have a real potential to improve their health and their wellness.
Occasionally, we talk to doctors who say, I want to tell my patients, or I do tell my patients about the lifestyle changes that will be really beneficial for them, and they don't do it. Occasionally, a doctor is so frustrated by a patient's inability to follow through that he or she will say, I'm just not going to see this patient anymore. Is it reasonable for a doctor to dismiss a patient?
The relationship between doctors and patients has become a lot more of a balanced partnership, but it is not symmetric. Patients have the right to say, this isn't working for me, and find another doctor whenever they want, whenever they need to. Doctors should not have that same luxury. The American Medical Association has ethical standards for how we practice. And fundamental in the doctor-patient relationship is that once a relationship is established, once a doctor has agreed to care for somebody, it is only in extreme and rare circumstances that they should end that relationship. And when they do, they need to assure that the patient continues to get care. They have to give them the time to do that, and they have to coordinate the transfer of information so the patient's health is never endangered. I really believe that while not a legal standard, that is a moral and ethical standard for physicians. So just because a patient doesn't do what I say is never a reason in and of itself, in my opinion, to end that relationship. And in fact, in your question, doctors telling patients exercise and the patient then not exercising is a failure of communication and a failure of making a plan that works. You will sometimes hear and read in the medical literature the phrase a non-compliant patient. And I actually think that's most often a sign that the doctor and the patient didn't create a mutually agreed upon treatment plan. When patients don't do what the doctor said, it's because they never agreed to it, or that they had unforeseen problems that it's incumbent upon the doctor to work with the patient to identify those barriers and overcome them. Sometimes not just by themselves, but by bringing in nutritionists and counselors and exercise therapists and the pharmacist, that the whole team has to help the patient reach their goals.
Dr. Myers, I remember getting a letter 25 or 30 years ago from a woman who said, my OBGYN fired me because I wouldn't take hormone replacement therapy. In particular, I think it was Premarin in those days. And she said, I'm just concerned about the possibility of breast cancer, and I don't want to take hormones. Well, now, of course, we understand that there is a risk with HRT, and some women prefer not to take hormones for obvious reasons. But the same thing has happened with statins today. We've heard from patients who say, my doctor fired me because I wouldn't take a statin. I wouldn't take a torvastatin. I just don't want to take them, or I have side effects from these medicines. How do we handle a situation like that if we're on the patient side of the ledger and we don't want to disappoint the doctor, but we don't want to take the medication for whatever reason?
Oh, that is really sad commentary on that happened and that still is happening. And I truly hope that these are anecdotes that are not very common. But when they do happen, and I'm sure you're right that they do, being a confident, empowered patient, a knowledgeable patient is important. That doesn't mean being rude. That doesn't mean being demanding. But it does mean saying what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, asking questions not only about the benefits of medications, but the potential risks and harms, speaking up about your values and preferences, and then coming to an agreement with the doctor about what the plan is going to be moving forward. I've heard, though I don't have evidence that this is widespread, that some doctors are feeling pressured because of quality metrics that are rating and ranking them, and sometimes even determining how they get paid based on data points that are not based on the context of the doctor-patient relationship, but did a statin get prescribed, yes or no? And that's putting fear in might be, and I don't know that this is true, but it may be putting fear into some doctors that if more of their patients aren't taking statins, they're going to get a bad grade and potentially not get a contract or not be paid or not get a bonus. And they put pressure on patients. That is a failure of our system. As American citizens, we need to hold the system accountable to doing better than that. When a patient makes an informed decision about their treatment choices. It is the responsibility of the medical profession to support them in that decision.
Dr. Myers, is there a way that patients and doctors can repair an impaired relationship?
It's a really important question, and I think the answer is yes, but you have to want to, and it takes work. Often, when a doctor or a patient realizes we're not communicating well, I'm frustrated, they know they've seen this coming, and speaking up about it, putting it on the table, asking each other, what are our expectations of each other? What do we agree to do for each other? If it's that the doctor is always late to the appointment, if it's that the patient comes in and is disorganized and takes too long to get to the problem and demands extra time, those kind of relationship issues need to be worked out. And you can work on reestablishing trust, treating each other with respect, being clear about expectations. But if your partner, from the doctor's perspective or the patient's perspective, is not willing to do that work with you, then it's time to think about, is there a better match for the patient? Is there somebody who could provide them with better care? And it's incumbent on the doctor to make sure the patient is not abandoned. But for patients to make that decision, when is the right time to invest in improving a relationship? And when is it a case of this isn't working, I can do better?
Dr. David Myers, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. David Myers. He's the Chief Medical Officer at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. Prior to his appointment as CMO, he directed AHRQ's Center for Evidence and Practice Improvement. He's also led the agency's primary care practice-based research network initiatives and served as the acting scientific director for the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. He assists in strategic planning and leads AHRQ's response to the nation's opioid crisis. He also directs Evidence Now, AHRQ's $110 million initiative to help primary care practices improve the heart health of their patients through quality improvement support and the implementation of new evidence.
Earlier, you heard from Tricia Torrey, founder of Every Patient's Advocate. You can find links to her work as well as the work that Dr. Myers has done at our website.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from hypoallergenic organic ingredients. That's KAYABiotics.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1150. That number again, 800-732-2334. You can also place the order online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can share your thoughts about today's show. Have you ever been dismissed by your doctor? Or have you had to fire your doctor? What were the circumstances? Tell us about it in the comment section for today's show.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you can sign up for our free online newsletter or subscribe to the free podcast of the show. When you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get our free e-guide to favorite home remedies.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.